Welcome to News for Scotland. Scotland's real news, without the gaslighting of anti-Scottish, Anglo-British mainstream media. Here are this week's top news stories. The founder and CEO of the first fully licensed vertical launch spaceport in Europe, Frank Strang, has died at the age of 67, just months before the first official launch from the Shetland facility. Mr. Strang, who founded SaxaVord on Unst with his wife Debbie and friend and colleague Scott Hammond, was diagnosed with cancer last month. The company was officially launched in 2017 and is set to become the only operational vertical launch spaceport anywhere in Europe, which currently launches all its satellites from French Guiana in South America. SaxaVord is preparing for its first official launch within the next few months. Scotland is leading the European space sector with 4 other spaceports in development and a large satellite manufacturing industry, the biggest in Europe. On the company's website, Scott, who is expected to take over as CEO, said, "I have been a friend and colleague of Frank since our days together in the RAF. So his death so young is an enormous blow, both personally and professionally. When we first identified the prospects for a spaceport at Lambeth, Frank would not take no for an answer and broke through barriers that would have deterred lesser people. He was a real force of nature, and his vision and his grit got us to where we are today, bringing the Unst and Shetland communities, investors and government with us," said. Half of all Scottish Labour MPs, including Scottish Secretary Ian Murray and Minister Kirsty McNeill, have received donations from companies or individuals linked directly or indirectly with private healthcare, according to research by campaign group Every Doctor. Every Doctor revealed that MPs had bagged more than £2.7 million in donations from people with links to the private healthcare sector, with Scottish Labour MPs receiving around £200,000 in donations with links to private healthcare. Among those receiving the most donations was UK English Health Secretary Wes Streeting, who pocketed £224,575. The largest donor to Scottish MPs is the think tank Labour Together Limited. It is primarily funded by Martin Taylor, who founded the hedge fund Crake Asset Management, as well as Trevor Chin, a senior advisor to the private equity firm CVC Capital Partners. CVC has investments in dozens of private healthcare companies in the UK, Europe and Asia, whilst Taylor's firm has held millions worth of shares in firms including United Health and Elevance Health. Several Scottish Labour MPs, Gregor Poynton, Melanie Ward and Martin McCluskey, have also benefited from donations from Danny Luda-Thompson, who is an advisor to investment firm Quadrature Capital, which has had extensive shareholdings in private healthcare firms. The donations have been declared, and there is no suggestion of wrongdoing under UK parliamentary rules, which allow MPs to receive cash from lobbyists, but the connections to private health firms provides genuine concerns for the future of the publicly funded NHS. SNP MSP Claire Hawhey said that these figures are alarming to everyone who is serious about protecting the NHS. Even before coming to power, Labour's Health Secretary Wes Streeting said that he would hold the door wide open to private investment in the NHS. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to see why when you discover who is bankrolling the Labour Party. She called on English Labour's Scottish leader, Anas Sarwar, to come clean on the donations. Watch our documentary, Condition Critical, Saving Scotland's NHS, now on the Scotland Channel. Glasgow's Govanhill has established one of Scotland's first apartheid-free zones, AFZs, with more than 50 businesses now boycotting Israel over the continued genocide in Gaza. This follows the decision of residents on Eigg to boycott Israeli products from the only community-run shop on the island, as reported on News4Scotland last week. The AFZ initiative was launched by the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which is looking to sign up shops, restaurants, businesses, community organisations and trade unions across Scotland to commit to the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, which has existed since 2005. The 54 Govanhill businesses taking part are all now boycotting Israeli goods and services, as well as international businesses that are profiting from Israel's oppression of Palestinians, from Coca-Cola to Puma and Airbnb. In a post on Instagram, one of the businesses taking part, Cafe Peachy on Victoria Road, said they were sickened, furious and heartbroken at the ongoing humanitarian crisis worsening every day in Gaza. The popular brunch spot added that it will be donating 5% of all its takings to the local Al-Khair Foundation, a charity which provides emergency relief and developmental support in Gaza and worldwide. Meanwhile, First Minister John Swinny said he is looking at a whole range of measures to take against Israel amid its genocide in Gaza. That could include a full boycott of Israel by Scotland. Meanwhile, the Scottish University's Jewish Staff Network, a network that brings together Jewish staff and researchers in higher education across Scotland, have called on their employers to divest from Israel and have also called on universities to reject the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. The Scottish University's Jewish Staff Network have been advocating against the conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, said the group. The Royal Navy has failed to properly maintain a network of 1,500 pipes at the Coulport Armaments Depot, leading to radioactive water leaking into Loch Long in Argyll and Bute. Coulport holds the Royal Navy's supply of nuclear warheads for its fleet of Trident submarines, which are based at HMNB Clyde at Faslane, near Helensburgh, just 50 miles from Glasgow city centre. The Ministry of Defence attempted to cover up the leaks of radioactive materials into the loch, but a 6-year battle to have the information contained in secret files made public was finally successful. The Scottish Environmental Protection Agency said the issues at Coulport date back to a burst pipe in 2010, which were caused by shortfalls in maintenance. One incident listed in the files took place in August 2019, resulting in the release of tritium, which is used in nuclear warheads. The Ministry of Defence claimed there had been no unsafe releases of radioactive material into the environment, despite attempts to block the publication of the files, which were released after a ruling by the Scottish Information Commissioner, David Hamilton, who oversees Scotland's freedom of information laws. The UK government insisted the files had to be kept secret for national security reasons. There's been a long history of Scotland being used as a toxic nuclear waste dump by the government in England, stretching back decades, including an unsuccessful attempt to dump nuclear waste in the Galloway Hills, which was defeated by former Scots advocate Willie McRae, whose murder in 1985 was covered up by authorities who claimed McRae committed suicide. The UK government in England now wants to force unneeded mini-nuclear power plants on Scotland, even though Scotland is entirely self-sufficient in clean renewable energy. A documentary exclusive to the Scotland Channel, Scotland's Nuclear Nightmare, is due to be released on October 23rd. Another documentary about the death of former anti-nuclear campaigner Willie McRae, who shot Willie McRae, can be viewed now on the Scotland Channel. The Labour government has been accused of being utterly reckless in its approach to nuclear energy, as a new report recommends ministers scrap needless safety regulations. A task force commissioned by the UK government to look into nuclear regulations has recommended a radical reset to speed up projects, including plans to force commercially unviable mini-nuclear reactors on Scotland, with the nuclear industry lobbying politicians with cash donations. At present, the Scottish Government is using planning laws to prevent new nuclear plants being built in Scotland. The task force criticised the unnecessarily slow, inefficient and costly system which governs new nuclear projects. But critics have accused the UK government of cutting corners with this dangerous radioactive energy source. Scottish Greens co-leader Lorna Slater said, "This seems utterly reckless. Nuclear energy is extremely costly and insecure, and it leaves a long and toxic legacy for future generations. Scotland is already self-sufficient in safe, environmentally clean renewable energy." George Galloway has announced he intends to stand as a candidate in Glasgow's south side currently held by Nicola Sturgeon, who is standing down in next year's Scottish Parliament election. The former Labour MP, who now leads the Workers' Party, confirmed his party will contest Glasgow's south side seat. Galloway came out in support of a Scottish independence referendum in June, despite having been opposed to Scotland having the right to self-determination for his entire political life. In 2021, he pledged to tackle the scourge of separatism when All for Unity launched their Scottish Parliament election manifesto. But in June, Galloway made the surprise announcement that he had changed his view, as he said in a social media post. "We support the right of the Scots to self-determination. 11 years after they last did so, we believe the time for another referendum is close. Given the collapsing authority of the British state, the pitiful Prime Minister Starmer, the moral decline of British society, the result cannot easily be predicted. Britain has become a cesspit," said Galloway. Yvonne Ridley, a former member of Alex Salmond's Alba party and journalist, will also contest the Glasgow Pollok seat for Galloway's party, following former First Minister Humza Yousaf's plans to step down next year. A bid to have Scotland decolonised at the United Nations has reached a watershed moment, Liberation Scotland said this week. A United Nations event to be held in Geneva on September 18th will directly address Scotland's right to self-determination. Formal representation of Scotland's right to self-determination under the auspices of the UN Human Rights Council is historic, signalling to states, diplomats, and human rights organisations that Scotland's right to self-determination is not just about domestic UK politics, but about international law, human rights, and decolonisation principles. It marks the moment when Scotland's cause begins to take on institutional and diplomatic form within the UN system, said the group. It moves the campaign from the margins of international discussions to the main stage of lawful consideration, added Liberation Scotland. But like every step of this international campaign, it requires funding, which is why Liberation Scotland launched a fundraising campaign with a skydiving event held at Fife Airfield in Glenrothes on Tuesday. You can donate by scanning the QR code on screen. Scotland's soaring energy prices aren't inevitable. They're the result of Westminster's failed energy system, says campaign group Believe in Scotland. Believe in Scotland is to launch its new energy campaign on August 30th. The iSwitch campaign will explain how independence would give Scotland the powers to take control of its vast renewable resources, reform the energy market, and bring down costs for homes and businesses. The campaign will be designed to speak to the undecided voters through a range of content focusing on real-life concerns rather than party politics. It's about making independence feel practical and relevant, said a spokesperson. Believe in Scotland will kick off the energy campaign with an Indy campaign day in Perth on Saturday, August 30th, when, as part of the campaign, the new iSwitch leaflet will be distributed. Believe in Scotland is asking yes groups to get out campaigning in their local area on the same day, reach the undecided, and show the movement is active, positive, and visible. This time, Believe in Scotland wants to focus on the ridiculous cost of energy and distribute their new iSwitch leaflet, highlighting how Westminster control keeps Scotland's energy prices high and how independence could bring them down. Scotland is continuing to be shortchanged by the BBC despite an increase in licence fee revenues in Scotland. The latest annual accounts for 2024-25 showed that while licence fee income from Scotland rose by 5% to £311 million, from £297 million in 2023-2024, its network spend in Scotland decreased by 23%, from £114 million to £91 million in 2023-2024. At the same time, it increased its network spend in England by 12%, from £1,685 million in 2023-24 to £1,855 million in 2024-25, despite a previous pledge by the BBC to spend more money in Scotland. The BBC has also been slated for using London-based production companies for what little Scottish content they produce. Scotland more than ever needs its own broadcaster, commented Peter Gill of S24 TV Limited, the parent company of the Scotland Channel. Simply sticking Scotland in front of the BBC title and pumping Anglo-centric TV into Scottish homes is just not good enough, especially when its focus not only fails to reflect Scotland properly, but is largely negative about our country. The BBC sees its role as protecting the Union, come what may, rather than reflecting what's really happening in Scotland, Gill said. The Scotland channel was set up to provide a genuine alternative to Anglo-British TV in Scotland, and whilst we operate on a shoestring budget, we are aiming to include a far wider variety of shows and films which can be viewed anytime on our channel, in addition to some great content already available to watch. What's more, you don't need a TV license to watch our channel, and all our films are about Scotland and are made here in Scotland, he said. Visit our channel on YouTube at the Scotland channel/videos. Former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has predicted that the United Kingdom will no longer exist in 20 years' time. She made the claim in her autobiography, which was released earlier than planned on Monday. In her book entitled Frankly, she said, "I still desperately want Scotland to be independent. I am also confident that it will happen." However, the independence movement fractured under her leadership with the formation of the Independence for Scotland Party, ISP, in 2020 and ALBA in 2021. Many blame her for focusing on trans rights to the exclusion of independence for the loss of support suffered by the SNP, and Sturgeon admitted in a TV interview earlier this week that she should have paused her controversial gender reform legislation. She said, "I didn't anticipate as much as I should, or engage as much as I should, on some of the concerns that might then be triggered." She added, "At the point I knew it was becoming polarised, I should have said, right, okay, let's pause, let's take a step back." Her book was due to be released on Thursday, with serialised extracts in The Times and Sunday Times this weekend. But Waterstone's Sauchiehall Street branch in Glasgow had copies 3 days before its official release. The publication of the provisional SNP conference agenda has raised concerns among party members that the SNP is moving away from member-led democracy and toward greater central control, said blogger and New Scotland Party founder Peter Bell. Traditionally, this agenda would be released well in advance, allowing for motions and amendments submitted by local branches to be properly considered. However, the 2025 agenda was published with what many are calling an unacceptably short notice period, just a few weeks before the conference begins in Aberdeen, said Bell. Even more troubling, the provisional agenda has been criticised for a complete absence of member-submitted motions. Instead of open debates on specific policies, the agenda presents a series of broad, leadership-driven resolutions, he added. These resolutions are seen by some as vague affirmations of party values rather than concrete policy proposals, he said. For example, a member's motion on a fixed timetable for removing nuclear weapons from Scotland has been replaced with a general resolution on independence that doesn't commit the party to any specific action if Westminster continues to block a referendum. The SNP has attributed these issues to technical problems with the digital platform for the conference, but this explanation has been met with scepticism. Other political parties, including the Scottish Greens, have successfully used similar platforms for their own conferences, managing to hold democratic debates and votes on member motions. This move has raised significant concerns about the party's democratic health. The SNP's constitution explicitly states that its national conference is the supreme governing body of the party, tasked with determining policy. By sidelining member motions and replacing them with pre-packaged resolutions, the leadership is being accused of trying to tighten its grip and suppress grassroots influence, concluded Bell. First Minister John Swinny has rubbished a proposal from 43 rebel SNP branches calling for the list votes at the 2026 Holyrood election to be treated as a de facto independence referendum, where ballots for pro-independence parties and unionist parties would represent yes and no votes, respectively. Swinny said, "I don't think that is an argument that would have any legal force at the end of it because it's not an agreed process. It might be what we would like to do. I would love Scotland to be independent today, but it's not going to deliver that process of Scotland becoming an independent country." However, the First Minister has ignored a route that does have full legal force, opting instead for the failed strategy of asking Westminster for a legally agreed referendum, said campaigner, blogger and spokesperson for the Respect Scottish Sovereignty group, Leah Gunn Barrett. We've been down this dead end before. It ain't gonna happen, she said. For nearly a year, Respect Scottish Sovereignty has been asking the Scottish administration and MSPs to put the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights into Scots law. There's nothing to stop Holyrood from doing this because the Scotland Act 1998 gives Holyrood full authority to implement both self-determination and direct political rights, direct democracy, into Scottish legislation by enacting the ICCPR into Scots law. And Holyrood also has the competence to authorise and conduct a popular referendum to approve or reject the draft bill prior to enactment through the Referendum Scotland Act 2020. The RSS position is backed up by authoritative support from the Scottish Human Rights Commission that stated in 2020, the Scotland Act 1998, which established the Scottish Parliament, requires both the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government to observe and implement all of the UK's international human rights obligations. In its February 4, 2024 report to the UN Human Rights Committee, the Scottish Human Rights Commission criticises the UK's failure to comply with the full International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It recommends that the UK, at every level of government, desists with all policy activities which restrict or undermine the level of protection for civil and political rights as set out in the present covenant. Thanks for watching.